The moment the docking clamps disengaged, 47 beings forgot how to breathe. My name is Voren. Up until 72 standard hours ago, I was just a logistics coordinator on Deep Dock 9, a glorified filing clerk for the Galactic Transit Authority. You've never heard of Deep Dock 9. That's the point. It's a refueling stop, a tax write-off, a place where careers go to collect dust. We get the freighters everyone else is too busy to deal with. We get the beings who can't afford the main hubs. We get the leaks, the delays, the cargo nobody wants to sign for. And every once in a great while, we get something that completely rewires your understanding of reality. This is the story of the day that happened to us. Before I tell you what happened in Bay 7, I should tell you what Deep Dock 9 was like before. It matters. It's the reason none of us saw it coming. Part 1. The Order of Things. Deep Dock 9 sits at the ragged edge of the Kelvaxi trade corridor, orbiting a dead moon nobody bothered to name past a registry number. We have 4 working docking bays, a cafeteria that serves the same reconstituted protein paste in 6 different colors, and a security detail of exactly one very tired Vextal named Austin, who mostly just plays cards. Nothing happens here. Nothing is supposed to happen here, but we do have a pecking order, same as everywhere else in the galaxy. It's not written down anywhere, but everyone knows it, the way you know which way is down. The Kaidan cartels run the freight lanes and don't apologize for anything. The Zorian dockhands, 9 feet of chitin and claw, my own supervisor Gorvak among them, do the muscle work and never let anyone forget it. The Vextal, my own people, sit somewhere in the administrative middle. Soft-shelled, long-lived, good with numbers, bad in a fight, and smart enough to know it. And at the very bottom of that ladder, filed somewhere below decorative, and just above pest, were the minor species. The ones nobody worried about. The ones you could shove, mock, or shortchange on a docking fee and nobody would file a complaint, because who's going to take their side? Humans were on that list, filed as Class C omnivore, bipedal, low-gravity origin. I'd read the entry once, years ago, out of boredom during a slow shift. It said, unremarkable physical specifications, non-aggressive baseline temperament, minimal threat classification. There was a note about their homeworld being some backwater called Sol 3, a single planet, no colonies of note, a species that had apparently only been part of the wider galactic community for a couple of centuries. The report read like someone had described a golden retriever, and then, out of some bureaucratic reflex, added, handle with the same caution as any wild animal. Outcomes have occasionally been unpredictable. I remember thinking that last line was a strange thing to include for a species that supposedly couldn't crack a Zorian exoskeleton with a hydraulic press. I didn't think about it again until the day the shuttle came in. Part 2. The Shuttle. It was a nothing vessel, a beat-up hauler, the kind independent contractors fly when they can't afford anything better, transponder chirping a standard cargo request. Requesting docking clearance for pickup. Manifest 88 Zeta Tan mineral exchange. Routine. I cleared it without a second thought and went back to my paperwork. The pilot's registry flagged as Terran. I'd heard the word before, buried in old xenobiology footnotes nobody read. Class C omnipede. Unremarkable physical specs. Low gravity origin. In the galactic pecking order, filed under minor species. Non-threatening. Basically the paperwork equivalent of a space hamster. So when the airlock cycled and this creature stepped through, the laughter started instantly. And I mean instantly. His name, according to the manifest, was Liam Chen. He was maybe 5.5 feet tall. In a station where the average Vextal stands over 7 feet and the dock workers are 9-foot crustacean Zorians with claws that can crush durasteel, he looked like a child who'd wandered onto a military base by mistake. No carapace, no claws, no venomous spines. Just soft, pale skin, dark eyes, and a ridiculous tuft of dark hair on top of his head that moved when he did, like it was somehow alive. He wore a plain gray shipsuit, unadorned, patched at one elbow. He carried a single duffel bag and a data slate, and he walked like a man who had somewhere to be, and didn't particularly want an audience. He looked, and I mean this with the benefit of hindsight and considerable shame, edible. Gorvak, my shift supervisor, was the first to pounce. His laugh is a horrible, wet, clicking sound, the kind that comes from a throat built for crushing shellfish rather than conversation. Well, 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 he boomed, his massive form blocking the human's path entirely. Did a kitty cruiser lose its anchor, baby? The docking bay erupted. Hoots, howls, screeches of pure condescending joy. Cathar and Rex, his two favorite muscle, banged their claws against a cargo container in appreciation. Even the Kaiden crew unloading 2 bays down leaned out to watch. I laughed too. I want to be honest about that because the rest of this story only means anything if I'm honest about where I started. Liam just stopped. He looked up, and up, and up. His face did something strange. The skin under his eyes tightened, and his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. I didn't understand that expression then. I understand it now. It was the face of a predator running a threat calculation, filing away exits, weak points, and worst-case scenarios in the space of half a second, the way you or I might glance at a weather report. "I'm here for a transfer container," Liam said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Flat. It cut through the laughter like a blade through fog. "Designation 88 Zeta Ton, Mineral Exchange." "Oh, it speaks," Gorvak mocked, leaning down, his hot, fishy breath probably fogging the human's pathetic little face. "That's cute. Little hamster wants his squeaky toy." He turned to the crowd, playing to it now. "What's the matter, little guy? Lose your exercise wheel?" More laughter. I even smirked. I'm ashamed of that now, but at the time it was just the natural order. Big ridicules small. Strong dominates weak. It's how the galaxy works, or so I believed with the comfortable certainty of someone who had never once had to test the theory. Liam didn't flinch. He just looked at Gorvak's massive claw, which was now waving in his face like a conductor's baton. "I have a schedule to keep," he said. "If you could just point me to the cargo bay." "Schedule?" Gorvak's eye stalk swiveled in mock surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry, your tininess. Let me just stop my very important work of standing here to personally escort you." He jabbed a claw into Liam's chest, hard enough to make him stumble back a step. "There's a docking tax, by the way. 100 credits. Liam's eyes went from calm to Arctic cold in a fraction of a second. I saw it. A flash of something primal, something old, gone as fast as it appeared. "I don't have 100 credits, he said quietly. "I have the manifest and a work order. That's it. Then I guess you're going to have to work it off." Gorvak grinned, showing rows of serrated teeth. "We got plenty of waste tubes need scrubbing. With a toothbrush." The crowd loved it. They closed into a ring of chitin, scale, and muscle, all focused on the tiny pink mammal in the middle. This was the part I'd seen 100 times before. The new guy gets hazed, he pays a fee, or he does some humiliating chore, and then we all move on with our shift. It was practically a cultural tradition on Deep Dock 9, one of the only entertainments we had. But this human, this Liam, he didn't act like prey. "I'm asking you one more time," Liam said, and his voice was so low I had to strain to hear it over the murmur of the crowd. "Step aside. Let me get my container. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. You never have to see me again." "And I'm telling you," Gorvak sneered, lowering his head until his massive face was inches from Liam's, "that you're not going anywhere until you pay up or scrub up." "So what's it going to be, little man?" Liam sighed. It was a deep, weary sound, like someone who had been forced to explain a very simple concept to a very stupid person for the millionth time in his life, and had genuinely hoped this particular instance would be the last. "Okay," he said. "You want to do this? Let's do this." Part 3. The hamster bites the cat. He moved before anyone registered that he'd decided to move at all. He didn't try to punch Gorvak in the face, though. That would have been suicide against a creature built like an industrial crane. Instead, he dropped low, spinning on his heel, and drove his boot into the side of Gorvak's knee joint. The Zorian knee is a complex unarmored hinge, evolved for a species that never needed lateral defense because nothing on their homeworld had ever been fast enough or stupid enough to attack one from the side. It is not designed to bend sideways. There was a wet, sickening pop, and Gorvak screamed, his massive body collapsing as his leg buckled beneath him like a felled tree. The crowd gasped, and then went dead silent. No one moved. The unthinkable had just happened. The hamster had bitten the cat. For exactly 1.5 seconds, I actually believed it might end there. That the shock alone would be enough. That the crowd would disperse muttering. That Gorvak would nurse his pride along with his knee, and Liam would get his container and be on his way. I have thought about that 1.5 seconds more than almost any other moment in my life, because it was the last window where any of us could have simply chosen to do the right thing without cost. It closed fast. 2 of Gorvak's dock workers, 8-foot bruisers named Cathar and Rex, the kind of muscle that exists specifically so supervisors never have to get their own claws dirty, surged forward. They weren't laughing anymore. They were enraged, and worse, they were embarrassed in front of a crowd, which, in my experience, makes any creature, regardless of species, considerably more dangerous. A Zorian fist, dense as rock, caught Liam in the ribs, lifting him clean off his feet and throwing him into a stack of cargo containers. He hit with a crunch that made my own exoskeleton ache in sympathy. He got up. He was bleeding from a cut on his scalp, his arm hanging at a strange angle, and he was clearly having trouble breathing. But he got up. He stood there swaying, looking at the 2 hulking creatures bearing down on him, and something in his expression made a few of the onlookers near the front actually take a step back, though none of us could have told you why at the time. "Stay down, you stupid little bug," Cathar roared. Liam spat out a mouthful of blood. No. What happened next was brutal and one-sided, and I want to describe it honestly because the honesty matters. He fought with a ferocity I had genuinely never witnessed in a sentient being before. Not the desperate flailing of prey, but something colder and more deliberate. He used his head, his teeth, his feet. He targeted eyes, throats, joints, the soft, unarmored places a species like his had clearly evolved to know about, the way a creature with no natural weapons learns to find the ones the universe left lying around. He was a whirlwind of efficient, purposeful violence, but he was one, and they were 2, and they each outweighed him by 400 pounds. They grabbed him, pinned him, and started to methodically beat him. They weren't trying to kill him. That much was clear even through the horror of it. They were trying to teach him a lesson, to put him back in his place, the place the paperwork said he belonged in. 37 of us watched. 37 sentient beings from a dozen different species, standing in a loose ring under the flickering docking bay lights, and not one of us moved to stop it. We watched as a sentient being was broken because he wouldn't beg. I watched and I did nothing, because he was just a human, because he was small, because the rules of the galaxy said this was acceptable, and because I had never once in my life questioned whether the rules of the galaxy were worth following. Finally, they let him drop. He lay in a crumpled heap on the cold metal floor, his blood pooling in a small, glistening puddle under the harsh station lights. He wasn't moving. Cathar gave him one last kick to the ribs for good measure. "Pathetic," he spat. "Should have stayed in your cage." And then Liam's hand twitched. His fingers scraped weakly against the deck plate. He was trying to get up. He couldn't, but he was trying. His lips moved, forming silent words. He was looking at me, at all of us. And in that eye there was no fear, no pain. Only a cold, terrible promise, the kind you feel in your marrow before you understand what it means. That's when the proximity alarms went off. Part 4. Forcible docking. Not the usual ones. Not the cheerful little chime that means a freighter is on approach. These were the deep alarms, the ones buried in the station's core reactor housing that most of us had never actually heard outside of a drill, back when Asen still ran drills. All hands battle stations, repeat, all hands battle stations, unauthorized vessel has forcibly docked at Bay 7. I repeat, forcible docking. All personnel evacuate the area. Forcible docking. That meant they'd ignored our hails, ignored our tractor beams, and physically attached themselves to our hull without so much as a courtesy ping. That took firepower. That took audacity. That took a species that did not care about our laws, our weapons, or our survival, and knew it didn't need to. Everyone in the bay froze. The name came through on the overhead display a moment later, and a cold dread, colder than the void outside the hull, washed over every one of us at once. Vessel identified, Drari battle cruiser. The apex, the Drari. The apex of the galactic food chain. A species so advanced, so overwhelmingly powerful that they didn't have enemies. They had targets. They stand 12 feet tall, encased in natural biosilicate armor plating that shrugs off small arms fire and most anti-ship weaponry alike. They don't negotiate. They dictate. They don't ask. They take. And if you resist them, they don't just kill you. They erase your existence from the galactic record, scrub your registry entries, salt your bloodline out of the historical archive so thoroughly that in 3 generations no one remembers you were ever there at all. The only reason they weren't running the entire galaxy outright was that they found the rest of us boring, unworthy of their attention, until now. The massive cargo bay doors, designed to withstand the vacuum of space, began to groan. Then they began to warp. Metal screamed as it was torn apart from the outside. The Drari don't bother with airlocks, they just remove the obstacles. 3 of them stepped through the smoking, twisted wreckage. They moved with an unholy grace for creatures their size, their multifaceted eyes glowing with an inner light that seemed to catalog everything in the room in a single sweep. That gaze passed over me like a targeting laser, evaluating my composition, my threat level, my shelf life, and dismissing me in less time than it takes to blink. The lead Drari, its carapace scarred and ancient, marked with what I now know were clan honor scars earned over centuries, stopped. Its gaze locked onto the crumpled figure on the floor. The tiny, bleeding human. The entire cargo bay held its breath. This was it. The human had somehow offended them. His presence, his existence was an insult that demanded a reckoning. We were all going to die because of this stupid, stubborn little mammal who couldn't just pay 100 credits and scrub a waste tube like everybody else. The lead Drari strode forward. The crowd parted before it like water before a blade. Gorvak, still whimpering on the floor with his ruined knee, tried to crawl away from the advancing giant. The Drari ignored him completely, stepping over him as though he were a discarded packing crate. It reached Liam and knelt, a mountain bowing to a pebble. One of its massive blade-like arms extended. It reached for the human's throat. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see it. But instead of a kill stroke, I heard something else. A sound I will never, ever forget. A sound that rewrote every rule I thought I knew about the universe. Part 5. Little brother. The Drari spoke. Its voice was like grinding continents, a subsonic rumble that vibrated in my marrow long after the words themselves had faded. Little brother, who has done this to you? Little brother. The apex predator of the known galaxy had just called the space hamster family. Liam's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the Drari, and a ghost of a smile touched his bloody lips. Took you long enough, Javak. Traffic was a nightmare. Your life sign beacon screamed distress. The Drari, Javak, rumbled. We came. I see that. Liam coughed, a wet, horrible sound. A little dramatic, though, don't you think? You're going to give everyone here a heart attack. Javak's massive head swiveled, taking in the frozen, terrified crowd. His gaze lingered on Cathar and Rex, who were trying desperately to merge with the wall behind them, their earlier fury replaced entirely by something closer to religious terror. Good, he said simply. Then his eyes swept over the rest of us. The bystanders, the watchers, the ones who did nothing. 37, he stated. Not a question. A count already taken, a verdict already half-formed. 37 witnesses and none acted. My blood ran cold. He knew. Somehow, in the seconds since he'd torn through the bay doors, he had already known. Liam tried to sit up, wincing. Javak, don't. They allowed this. Little brother, they are complicit. It's not their fight, Liam said, his voice weak but firm. They don't know, they don't understand. No, Javak agreed. But they will. The other 2 Drari moved silently. sealing off every exit in the bay without a word passing between them, coordinated the way a colony of insects moves, or the way soldiers move after 1,000 years of shared war. We were trapped, apex predators, and we were the mice. 3 aggressors, Javok said, gesturing with one bladed limb toward Cathar, Rex, and the still crumpled Gorvak. They will face clan justice, balanced, equal. They will suffer, as you have suffered. Cathar finally found his voice. It came out as a squeak, all the earlier bravado gone. We didn't know. He's just a human. They're nothing. Javok turned to him, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 50 degrees, though nothing in the environmental system had changed. He is clan, Javok said. He is more to us than your entire species will ever be. Your ignorance is not an excuse. It is an indictment. Liam grabbed Javok's arm, or tried to. His own arm was still hanging wrong, and the effort cost him visibly. Javok, stop. I'm invoking clan mercy. The Drari went utterly still. Mercy is for the clan to give, not for the offender to receive. I'm clan, Liam said. I'm giving it. A long, tense silence stretched out across the bay, broken only by the distant hiss of a coolant line the Drari had severed on their way in. Javok stared down at the broken human cradled in his massive arms. Finally, he made a sound, a low, rumbling chuckle that somehow managed to be both fond and menacing at once. You learn our laws better than our own hatchlings. He paused. Mercy is granted. The relief in the room was almost audible. It was also, as it turned out, extremely short-lived. But, Javok continued, and that single word landed like a hammer blow. Mercy has a price. You 3. He pointed at Gorvak, Cathar, and Rex in turn. You are marked. Your genetic code, your identities, are now logged in the Drari archives. Every one of my kind in every system we hold will know your faces. You will be hunted through every port, every station, every backwater we claim, for the rest of your lives. And if you ever cross paths with one of us again, there will be no mercy the second time, only oblivion. He raised a device from somewhere within his armor and scanned each of them in turn. Somewhere in the vast, cold datasphere the Drari maintained across 1,000 systems, 3 names had just become permanent outcasts, marked men walking dead among the living. The rest of you, Javok said, turning that terrible glowing gaze on the remaining 34 of us, are marked by your inaction. You will not be harmed, but you will remember this day. You will tell this story, and you will teach your young that when you see one of us, you see one of them, and you will treat them accordingly. Javok stood, cradling Liam with a tenderness that was somehow more horrifying, in its contrast to everything that had come before, than any of the violence had been. He carried him toward the ruined bay doors, careful, absurdly gentle, a mountain carrying a bird's nest. Just before they left, Liam looked back. He looked at me, at all of us, and he said, his voice quiet but somehow carrying in the stunned silence of the bay, I forgive you, but I won't forget. And then they were gone. The bay was silent for a full minute. Then the chaos erupted, panic, crying, screaming. Gorvak was curled in a ball, whimpering, his ruined knee forgotten in the face of a much larger problem now permanently attached to his genetic file. Cathar and Rex just stared at the empty, twisted space where the Drari had stood, their lives, in every meaningful sense, already over. I just stood there staring at the blood on the floor, the blood of a tiny human, a human with very large, very angry, very protective friends. Part 6. The Long Night. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, with the Drari cruiser disengaging and everyone quietly reflecting on their poor life choices. It didn't. What followed over the next several hours was, in its own way, almost as strange as the fight itself. Station Command tried at first to treat it as a security incident to be managed. Deep Dock 9's administrator, a nervous, papery little pharaohkin named Administrator Desk, who I had spoken to maybe 4 times in my entire tenure, Arrived at the bay within 20 minutes, flanked by Asen, our one security officer, who had apparently sprinted the length of the station and still looked less winded than the administrator did. Desk took one look at the torn bay doors, the scorched deck plating, the pool of drying blood, and the 3 marked men lying in various states of collapse, and made the executive decision to lock down all outbound comms, pending review. I understand the impulse now. He was trying to control a story before it could spread and drag the station's name, and by extension, his own career, through every registry from here to the core worlds. It didn't work. It couldn't have worked. You cannot lock down a story that a Drari cruiser has already logged into a shared archival network, accessible to every clan outpost, trade envoy, and diplomatic office across a third of known space. By the time Desk finished dictating his carefully sanitized incident report, one that described the events as a dockside altercation resolved through third-party intervention, which is one of the more spectacular understatements I have ever had the misfortune to hear read aloud, the footage was already out. Not our footage. We didn't even have working bay cameras in that section. Budget cuts, same as everywhere. No, the footage came from the Drari cruiser's own sensor logs, released, we would later learn, not as an act of malice or propaganda, but simply because Drari military vessels automatically archive and share all first contact adjacent incidents with allied networks as a matter of long-standing procedure. They weren't trying to humiliate us. They genuinely didn't think about it that way at all. To them, logging the incident was as unremarkable as filling out a maintenance report. It was we who found it humiliating, because we were the ones in the footage. Within 6 hours, clips of Liam's boot connecting with Gorvak's knee were circulating through half the trade networks in the sector, subtitled in 11 languages by people who had never been anywhere near Deep Dock 9 and had strong opinions regardless. Within 12 hours, someone had set the fight scene to music. Within a full standard day, the Space Hamster incident had become the single most discussed topic on 3 separate news networks, bumping an actual planetary election out of the top story slot on one of them. A fact the election's losing candidate reportedly found extremely irritating. I did not sleep that first night. None of us did. We sat in the break room, myself, 2 other Vextal clerks, a Kaidan freight broker who had watched the whole thing from his cargo hatch, and Asen, who kept dealing out cards to a table nobody was playing at, and we just talked. Or rather, we tried to make sense of something that refused to be made sense of. He called him little brother, said Pita, one of the other clerks, for probably the 9th time. The lead Drari. He called a human little brother. I heard there's more than one, Asen said, not looking up from his cards. I heard the Drari have had contact with humans for longer than any of us knew. Decades, maybe. Quiet contact. Off the record. That's not possible, Pita said. The Drari don't have allies. They have subjects and they have things they haven't gotten around to yet. Apparently, I said, they have a 3rd category now. Part 7. What we learned and what we should have known. Over the following days, as the story metastasized across the trade networks and every bored xenolinguist and armchair historian in the quadrant weighed in with their theory of the century, a clearer picture started to emerge, assembled, as these things always are, out of leaked reports, retired diplomats with something to prove, and at least one extremely talkative Drari trade envoy who apparently didn't understand the concept of an off-the-record conversation. The truth, once it came out, was almost more unsettling than the mystery had been. Roughly 40 standard years earlier, a Drari scouting vessel, not a warship, a small scientific survey craft, the kind the Drari send to catalog systems they consider too insignificant to bother conquering, had suffered a catastrophic drive failure in an uncharted system. A system that, as it happened, belonged to a species nobody in galactic society had bothered to properly catalog yet. A species called humanity. The Drari crew, stranded, injured, and by their own standards helpless, expected one of 2 outcomes: to be ignored and left to die by a species too primitive to understand what they were looking at, or to be captured and studied like an animal, which was, after all, roughly what every other species in the galaxy assumed the Drari themselves would do in the reverse situation. Instead, a coastal fishing community on the Terran homeworld found the wreckage, found the survivors, and, having absolutely no idea what a Drari was, no registry entry to consult, no galactic law to fall back on, did the single most predictable and, in retrospect, most Terran thing imaginable. They fed them. They set the injured one's broken limb with the same equipment they'd have used on one of their own. They argued about what to do next in the way humans apparently always argue about everything, and settled on the conclusion that beings who were drowning and starving got helped first and interrogated later, regardless of how many limbs, eyes, or teeth they happened to have. It took the Drari survivors several months to be rescued. In that time, according to the leaked reports, at least one of them, a young Drari engineer barely out of what humans would call adolescence, had grown close to the family who'd taken him in, learned their language, ate their food, watched them argue, laugh, grieve, and rebuild, entirely unaware the whole time that they were hosting a member of a species who could, with a single order, have reduced their entire settlement to glass. When the rescue fleet finally arrived, they came prepared for war, for tribute, for the wholesale destruction of an insignificant world that had dared to detain Drari citizens. What they found instead was a small human village throwing what could only be described as a going-away party for 4 alien castaways they'd nursed back to health, and had, by all accounts, become genuinely fond of. That was the day, as far as anyone could determine, that the Drari Empire quietly and unofficially adopted the human species as clan. Not a formal alliance, not a treaty. Something older and, to the Drari mind, considerably more binding. A debt of kindness owed, and a species catalogued forever after not as subjects or targets, but as something the Drari had no other word for except the one Jovach had used on our cargo bay floor. Little brother. It also explained, retroactively, several things that had never quite added up in the wider galactic community. Why human trade vessels, historically, had an unusually low rate of piracy attempts despite operating in some of the most dangerous corridors in known space. Why exactly 2 attempts at hostile annexation of small human colonies in the last 30 years had ended with the aggressor fleets simply vanishing from all records, their home systems suddenly and permanently silent on the matter. Why, when pressed, most experienced diplomats simply changed the subject whenever the topic of human military doctrine came up, muttering something about asymmetric deterrence and refusing to elaborate further. Humanity, it turned out, had spent decades quietly aware that the single most terrifying power block in the galaxy considered them family and had simply not mentioned it. Not out of strategy, not out of secrecy, but because, and this, more than anything, is the detail that keeps me up at night even now. Most humans genuinely didn't think it was that big a deal. Liam, when a journalist eventually cornered him for a statement weeks later, reportedly just shrugged and said something to the effect of, "We help people. Sometimes the people we help turn out to be 12 feet tall. That's not really our problem to manage." Part 8. The Reckoning at Deep Dock 9. For us, the fallout was more immediate and considerably less philosophical. Gorvak never worked the docks again. His knee was repaired well enough within a week, but no dock worker in the sector would stand near him afterward, not because they pitied him, but because standing near a Drari-marked outcast was, we all quickly learned, its own kind of contagious risk. Cargo brokers refused his shifts. Insurers refused his coverage. Within a month, he had transferred to a maintenance post on a mining platform so remote it didn't even have a proper name, just a number. The kind of place where nobody asks questions because nobody's left to ask them to. Cathar and Rex fared no better. I heard secondhand that Rex tried to petition the Drari embassy on Thren Station for a formal review of his marking, arguing, with what I have to assume was genuine desperation rather than any real hope, that he'd only been following his supervisor's lead. The response he received, according to the clerk who processed the request, was a single line. Following orders to break a small thing is still breaking a small thing. No further correspondence was accepted. Administrator Desk kept his job technically, though his dockside altercation resolved through third-party intervention report became something of a running joke across 3 separate trade networks, endlessly quoted, endlessly mocked, memed into a phrase people used sarcastically whenever they wanted to describe someone catastrophically downplaying a disaster. I understand he requested a transfer to a records position on a station in a completely different quadrant within the year. I don't blame him. As for the rest of us, the 37, as Javak had so precisely counted us, nothing official ever happened. No fines, no formal marks, no galactic tribunal. But something changed anyway, the way it does after you've watched something you can't unsee. I found myself in the weeks that followed, unable to walk past a new arrival at the docks without at least stopping to ask if they needed directions. Pitha started actually reading the xenobiology updates instead of skimming them for the funny bits. Even Asen, who I would have sworn had opinions about absolutely nothing beyond his card games, started keeping a small folded card in his uniform pocket with the Terran and Drari first contact protocols printed on it, just in case, he said. Though we both knew Deep Dock 9 would probably never see another shuttle like that one again in either of our lifetimes. I don't know what became of Liam. The last confirmed sighting placed him recovering aboard the Drari cruiser, his container of Terran ore mineral delivered to the vessel an hour after departure, along with a formal, groveling apology from Deep Dock 9 station management. An apology, I'm told, that a Drari administrative officer accepted with the same polite indifference you'd show someone apologizing for stepping on your foot in a crowded elevator. Not because it didn't matter, but because to them the matter had already been settled the moment the marks were logged. Apologies after the verdict are just noise. There were rumors later of a human named Chen showing up in reports from 3 completely unrelated systems over the following year. Once brokering a mineral dispute on a mining colony, once apparently mediating a border dispute between 2 rival trade consortiums, nobody expected to ever agree on anything, and once, bizarrely, giving a lecture on interspecies logistics law at a minor trade academy that suddenly found itself with a very long waiting list the following semester. Whether it was the same Liam, I couldn't tell you for certain. Humans, it turns out, are not nearly as easy to keep track of as their paperwork implies. Part 9, What the Galaxy Learned. In the months since, the galactic community has done what galactic communities always do when confronted with an uncomfortable truth: argued about it extensively, without actually agreeing to change anything. There were emergency sessions of the Trade Consortium about revising the classification standards for so-called minor species. There were at least 4 separate documentaries produced about the Deep Dock incident, 2 of which I'm told get significant details wrong, and one of which apparently portrays Gorvak as considerably more sympathetic than any of us who were actually there would ever describe him. There was, predictably, a wave of new interest in human recruitment across half a dozen industries that had previously dismissed the species as unremarkable labor, which I understand has led to several extremely awkward negotiations in which human representatives had to patiently explain, over and over, that no, they did not all have a Drari cruiser on speed dial, and no, this was not a standard perk of employment. But underneath all the noise, I think something quieter and more permanent shifted. Species across a dozen systems started looking twice at the minor classifications they'd never questioned before, wondering, for the first time in living memory, what else might be filed wrong. What other unremarkable little creature, politely eating its paste in the corner of some forgotten docking bay, might turn out to have friends who grind continents when they speak. I learned 3 things that day, and I've had a long time now to sit with all of them. 1. Size is an illusion, and the galaxy has been mistaking loudness for strength since long before any of us were catalogued. 2. The universe is far more complicated than any classification manual can explain, and the beings who wrote those manuals were, on the whole, considerably more confident than they had any right to be. And 3. Never underestimate a species that names its ships after famous disasters, because you never know who they have on speed dial, and you especially never want to find out by being the reason they call. The container marked 88 Zeta Tan was delivered to the Drari vessel an hour after the fight, along with that formal, groveling apology from station management that nobody on the receiving end particularly cared about. And as I watched the Apex disengage from our shattered docking clamps and vanish into the black, I realized the galaxy had just gotten a lot smaller, and a lot more terrifying, all at once. Because the apex predators now had pets, and the pets were looking an awful lot like the masters. Epilogue. A message from the cage. I want to close with one more thing because I think it matters more than the fight, more than the marks, more than the footage that made half the galaxy briefly forget its own elections. About 2 months after the incident, Deep Dock 9 received an unmarked data packet, routed through so many relay stations that our comms officer said it would have taken a professional codebreaker a week to trace it back to its origin, if he'd bothered trying. It wasn't addressed to desk, or to station security, or to anyone with a title. It was addressed simply to the 37. It was short. I've read it enough times now that I don't need the text in front of me, though I won't pretend I can give you his exact words, only what I remember of them, which I suspect is close enough. He said the knee had healed fine, and the arm had taken a little longer, and that Javok had fussed over him the entire time like an overprotective older brother, which, as it turned out, was exactly what he was. He said he didn't blame us for freezing. He said most beings freeze and that the ones who don't are rare enough across every species he'd ever met, that he'd stopped being surprised by it and started simply being grateful when he found one. He said the point had never been to punish 37 strangers for the sin of being afraid. The point, he said, was that somebody has to be the one who doesn't stay quiet, and it doesn't matter how small they are when they do it. He ended it with a line that Pitha printed out and stuck above the intake desk, where it stayed ever since, a little curled and sun-faded now, but still legible if you know where to look. You don't have to be the biggest thing in the room to be the reason it changes. You just have to be the one who doesn't sit down. None of us ever heard from him directly again. But every new arrival who comes through Deep Dock 9 now gets asked the same question before anyone lays a hand on them. Half joke and half genuine caution passed down like folklore. You sure you're not somebody's little brother? Nobody's laughed at the question since, and honestly, I don't think anybody ever will again.
If this story hit you the way it hit me telling it, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you would have done standing in that cargo bay. Would you have been number 38? Or would you have been the one who didn't sit down? More stories like this one are coming every day, so turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got a story of your own, human, alien, or otherwise, drop it below. I read every single comment. Thanks for listening. This is Voren, signing off from Deep Dock 9.